Welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. My name is Maika Leibbrandt, and I am your host for this second session of Gallup's Learning Series. This is a fantastic opportunity offered exclusively for you because you are a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach. We have a global community of, looks like several hundred of you already stacking up here in the chat. I want to just thank you right now for being here. This is our second session. I'm joining you from my home office in Virginia, where it is just after lunch. And I got to start my morning with you. I'll also get to end my evening with you. And it feels different from my typical rhythm of the day. I hope it feels profound to you too. So let's do a little bit of talk around how to get the most of this experience. And then I'll bring, as you can see, my two leading men in the series today with us. So as you move throughout the learning series, I encourage you to do it on purpose. So come prepared, minimize any distraction. I know you know that, but sometimes it's worth even just having that reminder that this is different from the typical texture of your normal day. So I recommend stretching or doing something physical before you show up, really showing up prepared to experience this differently than you would the rest of your day. You also might find that you want to take some notes, and there's two really helpful ways you can do that. One is this amazing invention called a pen and a piece of paper. So something to write with and something to write on, kind of old school style. The other is our participant guide, which my friends are going to drop into the chat for us right here. You can see CliftonStrengths just mentioned a link where you can download that participant guide. As you do that, you'll notice we've got all 7 of our sessions for the entire learning series all in one place for you. As you're doing that, you're probably going to realize we've got a fantastic lineup. So today we're talking about the Ask Me Anything session with Jim Asplund and Austin Sellentrop. You'll notice that this evening or later today, depending on where you are in time zones, you'll get a brand new tour of Gallup Access and the opportunity to think about how do you up your coaching game, create more space for you to really serve as a coach, and perhaps automate some of the other framing experiences you can do for your clients. You can also take a peek throughout that participant guide and see the other great sessions we have lined up for you in the future. All of that is also listed out as explicitly as we can in your Eventbrite invitation, I guess is what it's called. So where you registered for this event, go right on back to that link and it'll lay out exactly what the topics are, exactly what the links are to join that. One other piece that I want to mention before we dive into today's session is the chat. So if you can hear my voice, I'd love to know where it is you're joining from. Also use that chat to be a great place for you to maybe whisper to your neighbor. If we were all sitting in one big room, what would you be sighing over, having an aha moment, turning and making meaningful eye contact to somebody else about? That chat room is your place to do that. Don't feel like it needs to be the greatest thing that you've ever typed in order to type it out loud. Making the most of the chat. I have learned that using this chat, it's best to be on live chat instead of top chat. The difference there is you actually get to see the chat come through in real time, whereas if you choose what it's defaulted to, which is top chat, it will, Google uses its magical algorithms to serve up something a little bit more curated for you. So I prefer click on that chat and make sure that you're looking at live chat. If you're taking notes in your participant guide, it is a writable PDF. You can also print it off and write with a writing utensil on it. But if you prefer to have that space on your computer right alongside the window of the podcast screen, you can pop out that chat from YouTube and have the chat screen hover right alongside where you're taking some of your notes. Just a few pro tips from somebody who spends a lot of her waking hours thinking about online learning. Thanks again so much for being here. Really, you are the hands and feet of CliftonStrengths. You're the people who are making this work and helping our clients make sense of it and have those really important discoveries. Earlier today, we talked with Anna Sawyer out of the UK. And one of the things that really stuck with me from her session was when she talked about foundationally, CliftonStrengths is about respect, being able to have a language to name what you're great at, but also name what you're great and what other people should be honored for. And it doesn't get to that point where people truly understand it as a language of love and respect without coaches like you who truly make it come alive for people. So thanks again for being here. That's just a few housekeeping notes from me. I am your consistent host throughout the entire process. So if there's anything you need, feel free to type it in the chat. With your questions today, I'll be moderating. And we do think about this as this session specifically, kind of like open office hours with your two favorite professors. So I rely on you to supply some of those questions. I'll be taking some of the questions you've already submitted through our Gallup-Certified Facebook group. You also might want to think about staying in contact with others through that certified Facebook group, through our LinkedIn group that is Gallup Trained Coaches. As you're asking questions, use the little @ symbol and tag me. My name's a little hard to spell, but if you just type in Maika, Maika, it'll alert me that you've got a question. And as our chat grows, this morning we had actually a record number of attendees, which is about 500 people joining live. The chat does move quite quickly. So if you tag me, what it does is it just highlights what you've asked, and your chances of me actually repeating your comment out loud are a whole lot better. So thank you so much for being here. Let's get to these great guests we have. You've noticed that today is called Ask Asplund and Austin Anything. Perhaps the cheekiestly titled session that we have. We're excited that you're here. Just a little bit about the folks whose brains we get to pick today. Jim Asplund is the guy that you're probably hoping is answering your posts anytime you call out for somebody to give you a take on how strengths can have a positive impact. Anytime you're asking those challenging questions that your clients are asking you, really, whether you know it or not, he's the one you're hoping answers. So Jim directs all research on Gallup's CliftonStrengths assessment. He's also the founder and director of Gallup's advanced design and analytics practice, which is a long way of saying he spends a lot of time consulting with clients on what data is telling us and how we can navigate toward a solution through numbers that really go even just beyond coaching. His official title is Chief Scientist of Strengths-Based Development and Performance Impact Consulting. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, thanks. I was long. I need a bigger card or something.
Right? Do you need to just like take a sip of water after that one? It's kind of a big deal. Thanks for being here. We're also joined by a strengths practitioner who comes from a background of kind of boots on the ground doing things with CliftonStrengths. Austin fell in love with CliftonStrengths enough that he actually left his role where he was implementing it in a large organization and does this full time. He's worked in various settings from corporate finance to nonprofits to church basements with teenagers. He even uses CliftonStrengths as he's coaching his 9-year-old softball team. Mm-hmm. He's high futuristic, high positivity. I promise you're going to see that come through. Austin's really thinking about where we're going 10 years down the road. He's been working with CliftonStrengths for a decade and working at Gallup here for 4 years. Our CliftonStrengths portfolio manager, welcome, Austin.
Thank you so much, Maika. Glad to be here.
It's glad to have you both.
It's funny as you're introducing and you're saying Jim's the guy you hope is answering your questions. And I realized about 80% of the time when I answer questions, I'm pulling up an email Jim has sent me at one point or another to make sure I'm answering it the right way. So you're absolutely right. No, glad to have Jim here with us.
Better be more careful what I write then.
Only what you write to Austin. So feel free to, now that you know who these folks are, feel free to shoot any questions top of mind my way. I've got a couple questions sort of prepared from what we already cultivated from this coaches community. But first, before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to start, as all great interviewers do, with a little bit of a fun question. The question will go to both of you, but I want to start with Jim first. We have changed the language from love, crazy, envy to love, frustrate, and appreciate. And the question is this. Share your top 5, and then which of those themes do you absolutely love? Which of them causes you or others frustration? And which theme not in your top 5 do you appreciate a whole lot in other people?
Well, all right. Well, so my top 5 are analytical, ideation, individualization, strategic, and maximizer. I probably love ideation the most. I like to create things, whether at work or otherwise. Analytical is sort of something I can't help. So that one's, I mean, I like it, but I'm stuck with it anyway. It's there all the time, whether it's appropriate or not. Maximizer is probably the one that frustrates me the most because in my version of it, I'm never really quite done with things. So I always need externally imposed deadlines or I will not finish because I'll keep shining something until, and sometimes that interacts with the ideation in a not very productive way. Just along those lines. I think that, so along that, I think that I envy a lot of themes in other people, but my wife's very high discipline, and I envy that one a lot because I need it. And and it feels like something that would really help me out if somehow that had wound up there along the way, but it just didn't. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Austin, same question over to you. Love, frustrate, appreciate.
So top 5 are communication, activator, futuristic, belief, and positivity. When I think about the one I love the most, it's my belief. I think that's without a doubt the one for me. It gives me the confidence and the sort of the grounding on where I stand and what I stand for. So it gives me a lot of clarity in how I make decisions. So I love that one. Always have really appreciated that. The frustrate, without a doubt, is activator. My wife is one of the nicest human beings on the planet, and my sort of activator, hey, we talked about this, why aren't we doing it, can oftentimes show up in me sort of standing by the door waiting to leave, or me just sort of jumping up in the middle of the room and starting to gather things to get on with the next part of our day, and just to the point now where my wife and 2 of my daughters, my 6-year-old and 9-year-old, will say, "Oh, Daddy's activating." And so like, it's sort of part of our vernacular around the house. So I know it frustrates them because I hear them tell me. But that's something I've got to be mindful of. In terms of what I really appreciate in others, it's really funny that Jim mentioned discipline. My mom had as high discipline, high consistency, that combination. So I grew up in a house where everything was remarkably organized. And everything was really well planned. Like, we didn't take a vacation as a family without a 3-ring binder that had agendas and maps and resources. So I really appreciate that in her and in others, because that's so not how I view things. I see the benefit of having that, but I tried to do it. As many of us on our strengths journey, I tried doing it the way other people did it, and I never was successful with it. So I really appreciate that sort of combination of discipline and consistency.
Fantastic. Gosh, that tells us a lot. I feel like we could go into more curiosity about both of you just as individuals.
Yeah. We don't have enough time to cover that today.
Speaking of time, Austin, we now have decades of use of CliftonStrengths around the globe, in students, in professionals, in and out of different kinds of industries. What is it that you've noticed that people are talking about and utilizing strengths? How is strengths really coming alive for people around the world?
Yeah, I think that's I love that question, because it's one of the things I'm lucky enough in my role to be exposed to, is the variety of ways that we're seeing strengths be used and discussed and positioned in various settings. And I think much like in the early 90s, when engagement in the Q12 first came on the scenes, it was this radical sort of different mindset and this different way to think about something. And so people it got a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. I think strengths and a strengths-based approach has been such a counterintuitive thing. It's been so different than what society has been sort of telling us to do for so long now, that people have gotten on board with the idea that, okay, this can work, this can have an impact. And so for over the last maybe 5 to 7 years in particular, we've seen a real increase in other organizations, other groups sort of getting on board with the idea of strengths. So we've seen a lot of other things pop up that I think pair well with CliftonStrengths and the strengths-based approach, that it's starting to get a little more mainstream. And I think that's exciting in that there's less, we have seen less barriers to having to convince people that strengths make sense. I think that's becoming less a part of the discussion. And what's becoming more is how to practically apply it. How do we operationalize it? So I think that's one of the things we're having more and more conversations with our clients and with prospects and with our coaches, is it's less about making the case for strengths now as it used to be, and more about, hey, how do I really integrate this? How do I really get this to be part of our day-to-day lives? And I think that's a really sort of exciting shift in evolution in how strengths is showing up.
How do you answer that when people ask you, how do I integrate this?
I think that's it's a $1 million question. And I think I think it begins with understanding, what do you mean by this? Like, what is strengths? I think in a lot of organizations that we work with, and a lot of times when I'm pulled into the conversation, what they're really asking is, how do I get everybody in my company to get as excited about this as I am? Or how do I get everybody in my community to want to support this the way I do? And so I think part of it is painting the picture and showing people the impact it can have. But then there's the more tactical things around, how do I get every person in my company to take the assessment and get a report? How do I get everybody to talk with their friends about strengths? And I think that's where having conversations with people, and I think where coaches are such a powerful tool and community in this, is understanding, well, what are you looking to get out of, I say, strengths, right? Because I had a conversation. I saw the coach I was talking with earlier in the chat room, with a couple of our certified coaches, talking about some incredible opportunities to bring strengths into various new fields and into things that we've never as an organization ventured into, and helping it impact families and communities in a deeper way. But I think it begins with an understanding of, well, what are you looking to get out of this? What's your why? I guess would be how I say it. Because strengths for the sake of strengths, it's a fun little tool. But when you have strengths for the sake of driving impact in something, that's when it's really powerful.
So expanding the conversation quite a bit, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Excellent. A question here for Jim. We get this quite often, I would say, when we think about questions that come up quite frequently. And sometimes this question shows up as, hey, should I take it again? But I just want to ask you, what do we know about how CliftonStrengths change over time?
Well, we know quite a bit. I mean, there's always more to know and learn. I just recently finished a very large test-retest study. We haven't published it yet, where we actually looked at people who took the assessment more than once. And it was over 50,000 people we had the data on. And some of them took it years apart, some of them days apart or months apart. Well, days apart always confuses me. What were they thinking? We don't really know why they took it again, by the way. So, the typical reasons we get are, did they forget them, or they misplaced them, or they just didn't like them, or, sometimes people didn't take the first attempt very seriously. So there's a lot of reasons. And again, this population is a group of people we don't know anything about. So we do know that from this research and earlier research we've done that profiles remain pretty stable over time. And there's kind of two ways to look at that. The rank ordering of the themes, and then the sort of guts of the assessment, the raw scores of the themes, we can look at those changes too. And it's interesting that the way we report our results kind of magnifies the amount of change that actually happens in the raw scores, which is both good and bad, I suppose. If you look at the change in the raw scores, actually the changes are very, very small. But when you have a ranked ordered set of 34 things, if you only change one or two of them a little bit, you've moved everybody else because they're all on the line. And so you get little changes in themes a lot of the time that don't amount to anything. But that does drive the test-retest reliability down a little bit. But suffice to say that when you look at the results of all these people and the previous results we've seen over sort of a typical 6 months to a year time period, the results are extremely stable. And even going out past, we had 1,600 people or more who'd taken it more than 7 years apart, and their results were pretty similar to before, obviously less than the people who only took it 6 months apart. But I think we have to also understand any of that change. And so I'm back up for a second. There's sort of I'm answering this in an empirical way, but there's another way to do that, which I'll get to in a minute. But empirically, when you look at changes in scores, some of that could be true change in your results. Some of that could be measurement error. And any assessment like this has some measurement error. And we looked at in the paper, so when this thing finally gets published, you'll be able to see some of this stuff. But basically, we also looked at how long people spent responding to the items. We also looked at the their usage of the neutral option and the test, their sort of response patterns they used in taking the assessment, which gets into, I think, the instructions they were given sometimes. And people whose response patterns changed in the sense that they consistently either used the neutral option more or less, or they took more or less time significantly across all the items from time to time, their results changed more. Whereas people who were more consistent in kind of how they approached the assessment, their scores changed a lot less. Now that seems kind of fairly obvious when you state it like that, but why would people's response patterns change? Well, I mean, the extreme cases you can see in the data, you can see people who clearly were just going through the motions. I mean, they did it really fast and they give kind of the same answer to everything. And you see that more in college students because they probably showed up on campus and were asked to do 15 things, and this was one of them. And maybe they didn't quite understand why, and so they didn't take it very seriously. I remember being that guy. I mean, it's a long time ago, but I remember. Or sometimes, it's just apprehension, because people don't understand maybe what the use is for. I mean, there's a lot of things you can kind of picture why that would be the case. So I think, when you find people whose results have changed, or they're wondering if they don't like their assessment, I think first thing I would do, and if it's been a long time, they won't remember. But I think the first thing as a coach you should do is just ask them, how did you approach taking it? Were you free of distraction? I mean, these simple things, but did you take it seriously? Were you focused on, kind of answering the questions honestly, or were you worried about something in the back of your mind? I mean, all these things can play into the measurement error here. And if you look at kind of those cases, and you can kind of exclude them, the test retest gets better. So I think, we have some error that's respondent kind of error that would happen on any test, from the SAT to strengths assessment. Then you also have actual real change in themes. Now, we do know from our own research and that of others in personality literature that our traits tend to be pretty stable over time. There's other research models that have looked at this over a long period of time, from Tim Judge's sort of core self-evaluation work to people working on the Big Five and other things like that. And our research kind of lines up with that, where you get a sort of decay, and again, this is in the paper, but that's not out yet. And you get this sort of decay in test retest over time that kind of hits a floor, and then after which point, so far, it seems not to get any lower. So there seems to be kind of a baseline stability in our themes over time in terms of what we've been able to see so far, and it lines up again with these other bodies of literature, which makes us more confident that we're seeing something that's real. Now, there's some nuances to that. We did check other things. So we do know, gender of people, race of people, at least in North America, where that's more relevant, language, and things like that. Those things just don't matter, by the way. It's on the retest, they just don't matter. The only things that kind of matter is kind of the interaction of age and how long has it been since you took it before. So if you were real young when you took it the first time and it's been a while, those would be, I think, the people most likely to have experienced any sort of real change. Because we don't, it's not this like our brains stop developing ever. They do change over time. It's just the pace slows way down. If you look at the research on neuroplasticity, I mean, you can see that, people who play the violin professionally, and they have a bigger auditory cortex, their brain responded to that stimulus and did something with it. Now, that's an extreme case. For most of us, that's not going to be true. But that's just one example of the kind of developmental changes going to occur over a very long period of time. Now, having said that, when you look at the personality literature kind of on that same move, what that means is not that the rank ordering of your stuff changed much. It's just that you kind of expanded on all of them. It's just that you expanded more on the stuff that you were already pretty good at than on the stuff you weren't very good at. And so what you find is that scores, except on strengths where they changed very little, on other assessments like this, they get better over time, but the rank ordering didn't change much. And I think that's kind of what we expect to see here once we get enough people past 10, 12, 20 years. I mean, the thing's only been out 20 years, so we got to wait for that. Because part of the problem in this test retest, you got to find people. And so, they didn't sign up for that. And so you kind of got to track them down. Now, all of that is a very fast kind of empirical answer. There's a conceptual answer to this too, which is, when we were studying the talents that we kind of wound up with in the strengths assessment over decades, the evaluation was done for people. We included, people of all ages and types of people were included in that research, all kinds of positions. But the time frame of the interest in those performance, when we were studying, kind of what traits lead to people leaving successful, high-performing jobs and lives, we were looking for sort of longer-term, more stable traits. and the things that were predictive of sort of doing well over time. And so they tended to be traits that were of a persistent nature. And so I think, the raw material that went into this was observing things that were more consistent and long and enduring, and the data sort of support that. So I think all of that to me is when you first see change, I think the first thing you have to look at is the measure and error piece. So how are you taking it? Were you paying attention? Because ultimately, the only way your answer is going to change is if you answer the assessment differently. So why did you do that? And I think that's an excellent conversation to have with a coach if, in fact, the people remember it well enough to have that conversation. And so,
we talk about great coaches ignore nothing.
Yeah. And ultimately, the person should know or have a sense of which set of themes they feel kind of more in tune with. I get a lot of emails out of the blue, and I got one last week from a math student at Florida, and he has some really good questions, and he had taken it twice. And the first time he took it, he was 18, and now he's like 24. So I don't know why he took it again already, but he did. And his assessments, when he looked at it, and he's a smart kid, he looked at it and he said, well, it's changed a lot. But really, it was only like 4 themes. The rest of them didn't really change at all. It's just that a couple of them that he was either fond of or not so fond of moved, and in a couple of cases, not even that far. And so some of it's a perception. And then I just over email. I'm no coach, and God forbid anybody who ever has to have me as one. But so I just asked him a couple of quick questions, and he was able to tease out for him, kind of what he think happened, kind of after time, kind of thinking about it and reflecting on kind of who he's become after 4 years in school, kind of why he responded differently. I can't imagine how much better it would have gone if a real coach was talking to him. It would have been far better. So I think, a lot of times these things are very tractable once you kind of get into the conversation, and don't be afraid of the conversation. Because I think a lot of times people get this idea that they can't change it all. And in fact, if you look at the numbers and the way researchers look at the numbers, they don't change much, but there's always going to be a little noise. And so I think the understanding is that the baseline case is you don't need to take it again. But some people want to take it again. They could have a valid reason for that. Maybe they just want to do it. I don't think anybody should be afraid of that. And in fact, if there's differences, those might be diagnostic, or at least interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
So did you just give us the entire unreleased longitudinal study now?
Oh, no, there's way more in there.
That's
I feel like we got to...
As long as the
beautiful thing about it.
Is that what you were most nervous about, Austin?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about it is, like, we just got a download from Jim Asplund, and that literally is a component of this research, what he just shared, right? But there's so much more depth behind it in the paper he's been working on. So we're excited to share that with the world here later on this year. So
yeah, we wanted you guys to have the first sort of
Austin,
look at it. Or
absolutely, we did want our certified coaches to hear it here first.
Yeah.
That was the sort of the detailed piece of it. Austin, what are your bullet points? Like, if you were to give me the out loud executive summary, what can you tell us?
It's so funny because as I'm hearing Jim talk through it, the questions I've gotten over the years about it, right? Hey, should I take it again? Well, like the way I was introduced to strengths back in 10 years ago was no, there's not really a need, right? That was how it was positioned to me. There's not really a need to take it again. And what we've learned over time is, okay, well, maybe you need to take it again. Like, let's talk about that. It's fodder for a discussion. So I think understanding as we learn more, as we continue to learn more about the instrument and the tool itself, but also about how the human brain works and how people develop, we know more now than we did 20 years ago. And so I think it's good for us to always be evolving and learning our thinking. So the talking points are, hey, let's, if somebody's asking you that question, what's driving them to ask that question? If they're making that request, as a coach, what are we doing to understand why they feel that way? Is it that they feel they need to take it again because maybe they don't have accurate data on who they are? Is it that they don't like or they resent some component of the results they have? Is it that they just read something somewhere that this can change over time and they're curious? Like, what is it that's driving that? Yeah. And know that to Jim's point, I don't think we should be afraid of that conversation.
And just also, be aware that if they took it the first time and they were in their 40s or older, it's probably not, absent some weird circumstance, it's not going to change that much.
Right.
So I think you can bullet point it there to start with. For the vast majority of people, it's probably not a great use of your time.
Yeah.
but if you enjoyed it, or like Austin said, you have some other compelling reason, hear it out, and maybe they have a good one.
Yeah, I think the biggest shift in that conversation is what set of results are you working from? What kind of insight are you working from in the conversation with that individual? If you're working with top 5 only in that conversation, the fear of change can be greater because they can see 2 or 3 of their top 5 go away in a new set of results. And without the full context of the picture of the full 34, it may feel like a bigger change. Whereas the picture of the full 34 may show, well, 3, 4, and 5 are now 7, 8, and 9. And I know that happens oftentimes with people, that a dominant theme remains a dominant theme. The order shuffles, but the priority doesn't all that much. But it can feel like a bigger change when I'm looking at top 5 to top 5 and I've got 3 new themes in there. So I think that's another, over the years, we've evolved and put a greater focus on the 34 because we understand the intricacies and the reliance, the theme dynamic reliance that we have with each other. So we've talked more about that in the past couple of years than we did the first 10 years of working with strengths, right? So I think that's part of the evolution as well. So that's where I'd start the conversation, Maika. I think to your point, as coaches, understanding as a coach, every time my client is asking me a question or making a statement, there's something that's driving it. So what am I doing to get to that, to get to the root cause of it, rather than just treating the symptom? I think that's where I would go with it.
So I've heard both of you mention the rank order of themes. Jim, how important is where a theme is ranked?
Well, I mean, obviously it's important because that's how we give you the results. Ultimately, it's an intra-individual measurement, right? So you're looking at where you kind of prioritize how you take in information and deal with people and output information and communicate and all those things. And so the rank order is very important. Now, is a change from 1 to 2 important? No. Is it a change from 1 to 17 important? Yeah, I think so. And so you kind of have to think about kind of the magnitude of these changes. I think, small changes in rank are noise as far as I'm concerned. It's not signal, it's noise. Big changes in rank speak about something else. And again, a lot of it might be the theme that you're looking at, and some of it might be other themes that moved around, because the ranking, it's an order of things. You move something, everything moves with it. And so again, that's a lot of times trivial changes in rank. It may not have anything to do with that theme. It might be the other themes moving around, unless it's the number 1 theme. And so I get only exercised about big changes. And again, in the yet to be seen report, we kind of go into that a little bit. Look at just one theme learner, because it was one a lot of people have, and put it in there to kind of see, where the ranks move the second time, what distribution that looks like, how many of them stay high and how many of them go low, hint none. And so if they're high to start with. So I think that's the context in which I look at the ranking. If you're looking at the change, is it a big change or not? And if you only have one set of results, obviously I think they're, the kind of big zones of relevance are kind of what's important. Are you near the top? Are you near the bottom? Are you somewhere in the mess in the middle? And different people are going to have different reactions to those things. And some of those things are going to be different, situationally, what they mean. It's themes at your bottom can have different meanings, right? We didn't design the thing to tell you what you're bad at or what you're weak at. We designed it to help you figure out what talents you can turn into strengths. And so sometimes the things that fall on the bottom are less, and we get into that new report stuff we released last summer, but are maybe less things that you can't do, but just things that aren't meaningful in your everyday existence. So and again, that's where a coach can help. You guys can all help a lot of people sort that out in terms of what it means. Because I think some people might react negatively to what they get at the bottom until you kind of expose them to the different reasons it could be there. I'm not sure that's what you're asking, but
no, it's super helpful. Vivian in the chat also mentioned sometimes when your ranking changes, some of your theme insight statements still say the same, which I'm interpreting as like red plus blue equals purple, but so does blue plus red. So it's the sort of theme dynamics piece of it. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, so not to get too far in the weeds, but the insight statements are driven by a few things. One is the item level results. That's the first thing. And so then which ones show up in your feedback are driven by your themes. So actually the ones you get are driven, the set of things eligible to be in your insight report come from your item level responses. And then how your themes sort out determines which ones of them get in the report of that sort of bucket of eligible statements. And there are thousands of those. And so, but it's if it's still a theme that's going to show up, the change in the order of that theme, unless the items that change that were implicit in the or implicated in those statements. This is a really complicated answer. Sorry about that. They're not going to change much, but so I wouldn't read anything into that. It's
sure.
They're similar, but not necessarily linked together. In lockstep.
It sounds like it's still that same point we're making before of take a look at what's dominant and what's lesser. And that might still be the same family. And if there are changes, pay attention to what the change is.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
So it's funny. I was talking with somebody just the other day about this and said, so, I know Jim's working on this new research. What does it mean? What are the implications? And said, it confirms for me what I've always thought, that I am who I am. I'm going to mature and evolve over time, but this tool's not going to drastically change as my life changes. Right. Like if anything, the research that Jim has finished, it sort of supports this, that, if something really big in your life may change, then yes, your CliftonStrengths results may change, but all in all, not a whole lot. Right. So I think that sort of sums up what I'd say.
Excellent. There's been a lot of questions in the chat about domains. So I'd love to hear, realizing there might be people who got certified yesterday in this group, and there might be those of us who have always operated with this. I'd love to hear from either of you. How do you explain the best way to understand domains? What are they and what are they not? Let's start with Austin.
Yeah. So
activator communication. I knew you were ready to talk.
I mean, Jim, I love you with all my heart, but I got to talk too. When I
feel free. I have uncommunication.
No, when I think about domains, I oftentimes explain them in the sense of, if we look at a group of people, and we're looking at a group or a team of people, it helps to make sense of what are those things we have in common when we think about where we're at our best. So it helps me to make sense of, okay, this group of people I'm working with, they're at their best getting stuff done from an execution perspective. They got a lot of talents in this area around executing. It helps me make sense of teams. Okay, they're at their best when they're busy getting stuff done in action, or are they at their best, getting others excited about it, influencing, getting a message across? Are they at their best when they have time to think and more cerebral in nature? Or are they at their best when they're leaning on their relationships and they're spending time nurturing and developing those things? I've always used it very much in that sense of understanding where this group's going to be at their best. At the individual level, it becomes much harder to put a person into one of those four categories, because although I only have one domain, one theme in the executing domain, belief is the only theme I have in the executing domain. Does that mean I don't get stuff done? No, absolutely not. I get a lot of stuff done. I'm not at my best if you give me a long list of things to do and say, hey, Austin, just go do it all. I'm at my best when I'm interacting with others and I'm helping lead a team of people to get stuff done. Influencing and thinking is where I'm at my best, right? So it helps make sense of broadening and sort of categorizing 34 themes into like what style maybe, or where are you at your best? I always like it much more as a team or a group tool than an individual tool. So unfortunately, over the years, I've seen the phrase I was introduced to that my friend Kurt Liesfeld introduced to me was this concept of committing strengths malpractice. That we commit strengths malpractice when we look at a team grid, we look at those four domains and say, oh, I don't have any executing things. I'm not good at doing things. Or, oh, I don't have any influencing themes. I'm not good at influencing people. And we use it to identify gaps. So that's not what it's intended for. But inadvertently over years, that can happen where we use it to point out gaps where we don't have things, versus, hey, how do you influence people? We can all do all of them. It's a matter of where we're at our best. So,
Jim, can you talk a little bit about the in the recent release of our CliftonStrengths 34 report, where we do tell people this is your dominant leadership domain. What are we trying to do with that?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out what Austin described is exactly what we were hoping it would happen when we came up with the domains, a dozen years ago or so. And in fact, in a bit of weird irony, the group of people who were kind of finalizing it were all researchers, and we weren't getting done until somebody who did actually lead with executing these came in and told us to cut it out and quit having fun and finish the stupid thing, which we did. I think, the goal with kind of adding that piece in here was, again, to kind of help people. Again, it's still more in the team or group context to help you see where you slide in, and also to help people understand that even if because if we're getting used to looking at just top 5, if we look at all their themes and all the themes are involved here in the 34 theme thing, is to show them, even if they don't have a lot of people don't have influencing things in their top 5, right? Because they're rarer. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that there's nothing there. So we wanted to kind of give people a sense that there's something in there, so that the bar should have something there that says you're a little bit influencing, even if it's not in your top 5 or even maybe your top 10, and it's to pick one example. And so it's, again, to kind of give more of a continuum to kind of understanding where people's tendencies lie and fit into that group context. That's all.
That's great. So let's go into some of these other questions. They have been flying, by the way. If you're not looking at the chat room, it's probably good because you kind of need a seatbelt.
I'm noticing the ticker just keeps going up and up and up and up and up.
I didn't open it.
Yeah,
I'm
there's
too
also a really great question. No, that's good. Please don't do that. That's what I'm for here. So I am curious, how do you respond to clients who have concerns that CliftonStrengths is a base for making assumptions about behavior or locking them into a box?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll start and frustrate Austin having to wait. Obviously the goal is to have a conversation. If it's not leading to a conversation, then you got a problem. I mean, because if you start labeling people, it's sort of a very shallow use of the information, but also you're depriving the kind of conversation about what's next. Okay, so now, well, we found out you like to analyze things. What can we do about that? How can that help you in your job? How can that help you grow as a student or whatever? What skills do you need to learn? What knowledge do you need to pick up? How do you interact with other people? If you stop at the label, and there's research on this, Shane Lopez and I think it was Melissa Lewis, did a really good bit of research in our higher ed clients, looking at exactly that point, where if you stop at the sort of naming phase versus if you move on to investment in developing those strengths, how much better those students' lives are after the fact, at least as students, because it's sort of a short study. We can't say it enough that if all you have is a name tag with the themes on it, you're kind of wasting. I mean, unusually enough, that does help, but not very much. That you're really missing the big bang in the delivery of the knowledge and feedback, because it's supposed to spark discussions about who you are and how you can function optimally in whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah. I'm going to go off the reservation a little bit here on this one. And I would say, I think we're all making assumptions about each other every day, regardless.
That's true.
I think human beings are innately, we look at somebody, we have preconceived notions, we have unconscious bias, we label, we assume something based upon look, age, gender, background, bumping into them in the subway, whatever it may be. We're making assumptions. I'd rather that the assumption be based on some sort of scientific tool that gives me some understanding of who you are. So that I would say, even at its worst malpractice use of labeling somebody, it's better than letting it run wild with somebody else's ill-conceived or preconceived notions of somebody. So I think on that one crazy extreme, I'd rather somebody assume something about me based upon my top 5 than the fact that I'm a 35-year-old white male from Birmingham, Alabama. Right.
It's well said. We have, seen that, the inclusiveness conversations change quite a bit when you inject that piece of information in there and
Yeah.
give people something else to use
Yeah.
instead of whatever they were using before.
So that
Which could be
said,
nothing.
yeah, that said, to Jim's point, though, it's certainly not designed to be that. I think the application of the tool ultimately falls on who introduced the person to the instrument. So if I'm a coach and I'm pitching my client on, hey, take this assessment so we can have a conversation about it, that individual's perception of the assessment is going to depend upon how I talk to them about their results. I own how they perceive the tool because I'm introducing it. If I'm in an organization and I'm introducing it to my company, ultimately, like, I'm owning how it's being positioned. So I think that is where the responsibility falls on us as coaches and as advocates for strengths of how do we talk about the tool? How do we weave it into emails and social media posts and all the ways we make our brand known out there, whether it be through personal interaction or whatever it may be. I think that's where the responsibility falls on us to position it correctly. But yeah, that's my belief coming through there for you. How about that?
So, Austin, you've launched strengths in large organizations. You've helped managers think about how do they start. You've even been in that kind of difficult place maybe some of our coaches are in, where you're trying to kind of write the course or change course a little bit. How do you set up? Let's say you're going to go into a brand new organization who's never heard of this before. How do you pitch it so that it becomes a growth-oriented conversation that really goes where we want it to go?
Yeah, so I think the hardest challenge in that process is I have to realize that naturally the people I'm talking to don't love strengths as much as I do. So if I go into the conversation trying to tell them how great strengths is, they're going to see my emotion for it, but maybe not care one bit about it. I have to go into the conversation with a curiosity around what they care about. What is it that drives their decision-making? So it's taking a strengths-based approach to understanding them. So for me, it's always my approach, my sort of default way of getting there is engaging them in conversation about where they're going as a company, where they're going as a department, where they're going as a team, and what they're trying to accomplish. And then asking them what they're doing, what's successful for them in helping them get there. In that discussion and in that conversation, there is almost always an opportunity to talk about how focusing and better understanding their people can help them get there. And there's no better tool I've ever found than CliftonStrengths to understand human beings. And so that it's a multi-step process to get there. Yeah. And I think one of the things I've run into too many times to count is people get so excited about strengths. They want to go run and fix every problem in the world with strengths.
Yeah.
And if you lead with strengths, you may be missing what the team really needs, right? Sometimes the best thing a team needs is just a vent. They don't need a strengths workshop. They need an hour just to get things off their chest, right? Sometimes strengths can be a great tool in helping you get there, but you don't want to start with it because they're not ready for it. There's a maturity level needed. All those kinds of things that in my experience inside my organizations and then, leading our practice around this, when we push strengths onto people, they're less receptive to fully maximizing the impact of it. That's when we push it on people is when it becomes a check the box activity. I got my name tag, and you hear phrases like, "Oh yeah, we did strengths," because it's just like, "Oh, we did one of those breakout rooms. That was fun." Like, well, what'd you learn from it? What'd you gain from it? Oh, I don't remember. It was 2 years ago, and it doesn't make an impact. Whereas when you understand what they're trying to get to, and you can connect, and Jim Clifton does a great job talking about this with us, is like, what's the why? What's the why of strengths? And to me, the beautiful thing about it is I I don't know what your why is, and I get to find out. And that's my curiosity around humans sort of leads me to want to find out more and more organizations, companies, communities, coaches. What's your why?
And if you look at our companies and our meta-analyses, and in the universities we work with, the ones that did it the best did go into it with some intentionality. They did it to solve a problem or to help accomplish something. And they knew what that something was when they started.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
That's beautiful. I've got you. I just looked at the clock to be totally transparent, which is really, really strange for me because usually I've got my eye on the clock the entire time just to be super in charge. But we've got time for one more question for Jim and one more for Austin. And I want to go to Jim first. This is a question that came from our Facebook page. We did career surveys with Gallup years ago. Is there published data on strengths and careers?
Well, published, no. Data, yes. You have a lot of ideas in this job, and some of them go well, and some of them don't go well, and some of them go well, and you still haven't had time to do anything with them, and that's where that one sits, I'm afraid to say. We collect a lot of data. We did some things. I had a totally different objective in mind, which went nowhere because, long story. But the research is still pretty good. So actually, I'm still going to do something with it because we got good data from it. Basically what we found is, I think, not surprising, which is, or maybe it is surprising, people who take strengths don't look at that as a kind of a tell me what to do with my life tool, like the strong interest inventory or the Holland job codes or something like that. We've looked at that, by the way, and it just doesn't work that way. Nor I think should it. I think that should come from other motivations for some people. What we can say is that if you look at people who have similar theme profiles, regardless of the job, the things that they like to do, the things they told they're good at on the job, be that a dentist or a professor or a farmer, are kind of the same things. So if you're a high relator, you get similar answers from those people, even if they're doing very different things in their job. They do them in some somewhat similar way. And the cool thing I found was, if you look at, so I look at my own profile and found the 10 people in the career data we had who are most like me, and they were doing a lot of different things. There, I'm sure, were already frustratingly nerdy accountants and professors. There was an astronomer in there. I mean, there were, people who like to think and look at numbers, but that's about as far as the commonality went. But if you looked at kind of how do we like to be managed, what do people rely on us to do, what makes us good coworkers, in our own opinion, those answers were pretty similar. So I think there's a germ in there that the way we do those jobs might be fairly common, and more to come as I kind of dig into it more. But that it doesn't predict, and I think nor should it probably, what you're going to do, because there's a lot of other variables in there that have nothing to do with strengths.
Yeah.
Thank
More
you.
to come. More to come.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Austin, last question is going to go to you.
Okay.
So I want to know from Maureen in the Facebook group. By the way, she's joining right now, I think, from Paris. She is asking, I'm going to try and summarize this. Maureen, keep me honest if this is not quite what you meant. But I think the gist of her question is really about what is the future of learning for Gallup coaches?
Wow, what a great question. So, I think one of the things I love coming from a learning background, right? Having been a course leader and a coach and things along those lines, I value learning. I think we as an organization are evolving and adapting to how our clients like to learn, how our customers like to learn, how the world is learning differently. And so we're trying and expanding a lot of the modes with which we deliver learning. I think we're getting better at digital learning. And so thinking about, 5 years ago, we had little to no online modular-based learning offerings. We're now building out, we have an inventory, and we're building those kinds of things. For the coaching community in particular, I think we see value in this learning series, and I think it's an example when we have thousands of people come to this, the power of pulling community together for this. So I think you'll continue to see us try to refine the existing modes we're using, but then also thinking and exploring blended learning offerings of how do we get our our really great content and experiences we do in person right now? How do we create blended offerings where it can be offered remotely for larger groups of people simultaneously around the world? And so taking some of our classes and thinking about how we do that. How do we create more sense of community for this group in particular through things like social media, but also sort of things like we're taking advantage of at our summit this summer in June. When two things to say about that. One, it's a great learning opportunity. We'll have a lot more detail to share around the research Jim was talking about earlier at the summit this year. But then also things like mentor coaching, where we're offering for this summer at the summit, ICF level mentor coaching hours for the first time, where you can sit down with one of our coaches and take advantage of an hour of ICF mentor coaching that many of you need to retain your ICF certification or sort of renew your ICF certification. So we're always looking and evolving for that. I think one of the things that's coming in 2020 is a more intentional and robust approach for gathering data and feedback from the coaching community. And so thinking about how you like to learn, what are the things that we do right now that you really love? We know we have a great following. I mean, who doesn't love Theme Thursday with Maika and Jim? It's a highlight of my week to listen to. But how do we continue to double down on the things that are working, but then innovate and find the new ways that we maybe haven't gotten to yet, and we haven't figured out how to do with excellence yet, but need to. So I hope that's enough of an answer there. If not, you can always reach out to me. By the way, it's funny. I made one comment on a Call to Coach a couple weeks ago about how I'm not on Facebook, but I'm on LinkedIn. And since that moment, my LinkedIn messages have gone up 300%. And I love it. Keep them coming. That's a great way to get in touch with me with any specific questions around those kinds of things.
Excellent. Here's the secret. A question for Austin should always have an element of futuristic, and it'll float to the top of his inbox.
You'll get a better quality answer for sure.
Is there anything we've talked about that either of you'd like to add to, or anything on your mind before we close?
I was cracking up as Jim was answering that last question about the career research, and here linking back to him talking about love, frustrate, earlier about his ideation, because it's another one it's a great example of one of those ideas that Jim took, ran with, but then another idea came in that had more urgency, more excitement behind it, something else, and so it didn't come through. I just got a kick out of that.
Yeah, the lack of discipline. I think you're seeing that a little bit.
Yeah. So.
Oh, thank goodness you have other themes. Thank you both for your time today. This could have, as somebody's in the chat said, this could have gone on, all evening. Yeah. So thank you. And I think it would have just kept going. So thank you for those of you who are joining right now. For anybody who right now has been listening to this on demand, thank you as well. The richness of this experience is mostly thanks to you and your great questions. I was a little concerned I wasn't getting enough questions, because that happens sometimes during some of our other live podcasts.
Have you not met these people?
I know they did their homework, right? I'm not surprised. I'm just delighted. Please stay in touch with us. We have floated the idea of a hashtag 2020 learning series. So you can tag. Another reason you might want to do that is just so that you can track what other people are hearing, and think about that as just the richness in other perspectives. So you don't have to be in charge of relying on your own brain to hold all this information. You can stay in touch with Austin on LinkedIn. You can stay in touch with the rest of your friends through any of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, or you can follow me at Strengths Talk on Instagram. We're going to be back in about 4 hours. Is that right? 5 hours from now, with a demo of Gallup Access. That's not just, hey, here's this cool tool. I hope you look at it as, what kind of tools are you making the most of, so that you can create more space for real coaching? That, for me, in these first 2 sessions, has certainly been a through line of being able to hear the importance of framing up your expectations so that you can create a wonderful container to really have some breakthroughs. And that positions you differently than just somebody who has a great experience or has a really cool tool to share. So tonight, I hope you join us. If you've missed Jim Collison, and I will be honest, I'm not the same without Jim. So if you've thought, Micah, you're good, but yeah, we could use that other half of you. He'll be back later this evening, as will Austin. And just another piece to keep in mind, tomorrow we've got a live coaching experience from one of our MCC certified coaches. On Thursday, we get to talk about rediscovering the tools that you didn't know you already had, plus another live coaching experience and an idea of how do you develop a coaching journey. I'm going to go ahead and call it out right now that perhaps the theme of hashtag 2020 Learning Series is coaching is bigger than one tool. And it really is about framing it so that you can make a much bigger impact with the great work that you already do. So thank you, Jim and Austin, for joining us today. My behind the scenes, Jim, is I'm going to show the next slide. And that is just a little bit of information about how you can use this learning series for your own continuing education credits beyond just the benefit of being here, having this brilliant, I think, conference level learning in the comfort of your own home or your own organization, wherever you're joining from. It's also available for a resource development hour. This one session, you might notice, is slightly different than the other 6 that we're offering. This one, because it is about the tool itself and not quite as overtly about coaching, it's not available for a core competency hour, but it is available as a resource development hour. If you've got any questions about any of that, just email ceu@gallup.com. But don't worry, you don't have to email that in order to get an eval in your inbox. As long as you've registered for this course, we'll send you an evaluation on Friday. And in that evaluation, you'll note which of these sessions you attended live and which you also attended perhaps on demand. And that's how we'll make sure to get all that information right in front of your inbox where you can use it. Thanks so much for joining. We hope to see you again in just a few hours.